She's an author, professional storyteller, and a folk artist who found her connection to art well into adulthood. Her name is Joyce Morrow Jones, and she's next. Open Door Cleveland with Vince Robinson starts right now. And I'm speaking with Joyce Morrow Jones. She is an artist in the Cleveland area, and she is someone who I have known for quite some time. I'm really honored to have her on Open Door Cleveland. Welcome to the show, Joyce.
Oh, thank you very much. This is awesome. I enjoy talking with you and sharing thoughts and about things that are going on in the world right now.
So in the interest of transparency, I will share with you that I actually know Joyce through her sister, and this show is being recorded, but today is actually her sister's birthday. And I know this about the Morrow family. It is a very artistic family. I know your mother does art. Your brother's a photographer. I've seen your sister, Eileen, just blossom into a phenomenal architectural artist. And I know that she, shoots other things, but architecture is one of her strong suits. Tell us about the artistic aspect of your family and how you got involved in art.
Well, what's interesting is that all of us have come into art late in life. For me, it was, I would say, maybe about 12 years ago, and not even quite 12 years ago. And the same for Eileen, and my mother didn't have an artistic bone in her body that we knew of until she retired from teaching. So I think it's the opportunity of being at a certain place in your life where you can explore certain aspects of who you are and find expression for it. And so while I might have dibble-dabbled in crafts, my craft evolved into what I call folk art, and my folk art evolved into other aspects of art that you would now see in galleries. And I think there's a subtle distinction because they're all artists. However, it's the acceptance and the understanding of what it is that you're expressing and how you want to see it manifested in the world.
Okay, so we're going to talk a bit more about the art, but before we get to your specific genre and the artistic endeavors that you've been involved in, you shared with me that you've been involved in nonprofit administration. Could you talk about what you've been doing, in terms of your past in relation to that?
Yes, I started out in program development and doing programs for different nonprofits like the YWCA, then it evolved into fundraising and grant development. So for about 30 years, that's pretty much what I did for the United Way, the March of Dimes, Eliza Bryant Center, and quite a few other organizations. And so my love for developing programs and then doing the grant writing for them, was part of my passion to see effective outreach in the community and servicing constituency and stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk about what some of those programs were?
Well, for the YWCA, there were programs for the children to come in and to have a place to come and to do either recreational programs or after school programming. I recall that one of the programs that took me into the schools was called PAC, which was Peer Approach to Counseling Teens. And that was a program to help children to talk about how they their sexuality and how they could understand who they were as a male or female, and not just a young adult who was exploring sex, basically. And I think that was the whole concept was dealing with um, how I can be a sexual being without and relate to other people as from a gender standpoint without having to engage in sex. And it's about self perception, self identity. And if that program were to still be in existence, it would probably include a lot of transgender issues, just being able to talk about, what human sexuality means in terms of relationship to other people.
You in saying that if in saying that that program may not exist anymore, I'm just kind of thinking about how we're in a new place right now, and maybe the resources or the programs that had existed in the past aren't really, able to be done right now. Can you talk a little bit about how things have changed with respect to nonprofit organizations based on the challenges that we are having politically and economically right now?
Wow. Big question. And it's so multifaceted. I don't even know if I could begin to touch on that. But if I were to go back to that particular example, um, I was an ancillary instructor, meaning that I went into the actual high school and I conducted a program, and it was during the period for their health classes. So I would go in maybe twice a week, and during the time that segment for that health class, I would actually conduct programs. Well, organizations don't have the money to do that anymore, but it was a really good collaboration of community and community efforts outreach that could go into the schools and actually work with the kids. Um, and I just don't see that can happen right now in terms of the level of funding and opportunity. That program lasted maybe about 3 months, and then the funding ended. So that's kind of where we are right now. Where do we find the funding and the opportunity to continue those type of collaborations?
Hmm. But in that, you can see the value in it, because I would have to imagine that, you facilitated or you had some type of connection to the program, and you were able to get feedback on its effectiveness. But then you run up against this wall of funding not being available. And as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about how, within the past few months, we always get this narrative that there's not enough money, that we have to cut back here and cut back there. And the whole time we're also spending money, increasing amounts of money on defense, and now it's public safety. How is it that all of this money magically became available because there was a crisis, when we've had these crises all along, but we're always told that we can't do anything about them? How is it that the needs of humans are, I don't know, maybe they're overshadowed by this need for security, anti-terrorism, whatever they use to justify spending more money on guns and less money on people?
I totally understand where you're going with this, and the priorities just are not lining up. They just are not. But again, because I was working with a grant funded program with an organization that was outside of the school system, that presents its own other issues. So it wasn't something that the education the school district provided money for. So this is where collaboration is very effective, in that if the school district could not fund it within their own system because they did not have the money. The money was available from the outside. So it still has to be that balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. You know, the other issue with respect to funding is that the model that they use for funding schools is kind of outdated, and they've known it for some time, but they haven't really taken the initiative to change it. I mean, you know, you take a city like the city of Cleveland. I live in Glenville. A lot of my neighbors, and I'm speaking in terms of the general community and not those in my immediate vicinity. But you look at the general community, a lot of people are renters, so they're not paying property taxes. And then you have the elderly portion of the population of this community who don't have children in school anymore, and they're struggling to pay their property tax. But, you know, every few years, you know, they come and say, well, we need to pass a levy. So, you know, you have people who don't have a direct interest in the school system being held responsible for funding the schools. So there are things that have needed to be changed for a long time, but they're not being changed. And then the overall citizenry suffers from it.
Correct. But there, I think where we're, because we cannot resolve all the issues within any one particular system, such as like the school districts, there is then incumbent, what is the community doing to provide the supplemental services? And that's the beauty of having nonprofits and how they step up to meeting the needs where the other systems cannot. So when we talk about the role of artists and community and how they engage with other partnerships and other stakeholders to recreate another way of processing and help engaging, providing those services in a way in which people can begin to process and thrive and grow. That's where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that's vital to our community. And as I have these programs and I talk to people who are doing things, I can see how there are so many folks in our community who are willing to step up and fill in some of those gaps. And basically what they need is financial support. And they, you know, can also benefit from folks who volunteer to pitch in and to assist with moving things forward. You're listening to Open Door Cleveland. I'm Vince Robinson, and I'm having a conversation with artist Joyce Morrow Jones. We'll be back with more Open Door Cleveland right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, Burton Bell Carr Community Radio Station. We'll be right back.
I count, you count, your grandparents count, newborns count, and everyone you've seen today counts. If you've lived in the country only a few weeks or for your entire life, you count. If you live alone, with family, with friends, or with people you don't know all that well, you all count. Everyone in Cleveland counts. And everyone living in your household on April 1st needs to get counted as part of the 2020 census. An accurate count informs how billions of dollars in federal funding gets distributed annually for health clinics, after-school activities, road repairs, and hundreds of other programs. Shape your future. Start here. Visit 2020census.gov.
We're back with artist Joyce Morrow Jones right here on Open Door Cleveland with Vince Robinson, and we are on 95.9 FM WOVU. When we left for the break, we were talking about the intersectionality between the nonprofit world and the needs of our community and the governmental sources that are seeing the dollars dwindle. Let's continue our conversation and shift gears and talk about the role of artists. In our pre-conversation for this show, we talked about this notion that artists are non-essential players in the current landscape, but the reality is that artists are quite essential because they do so much to support the mental health and the sanity of people who live in our communities. Talk about the art that you do specifically and how you see that fitting into a paradigm of healing.
Well, I'm also a professional storyteller, and I spend a great deal of time researching different cultures. And, storytelling is a beautiful way of helping us to understand where we fit into the world, because it's as you tell a story or weave a story, each individual can see themselves within that context. Well, the artist does the same thing. So for me, one of the things that I try to do is to weave those stories into my art, and with the hope and the desire that I can begin to unweave or to weave and to provide a context for understanding history. So much of our history has been rewritten or refashioned, and once now those things are being debunked. So how do we begin understanding, where we fit in the whole element of history? I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about cowboys and Indians and how we grew up in that era. And, now I don't know what to think when I see a movie about cowboys and Indians. And, cinema is part of that whole arts context. When we were growing up as children and we saw cowboys and Indians, we saw ourselves as part of that story. And for the most part, we were for the cowboys. We wanted to make sure that they defeated the Indians. And to see those movies now, I cringe. I want to root for the Indians, for their rights. But we didn't understand that as part of our history then.
Yes.
It was so in retelling that story, artists have an opportunity to bring about national pride in a way in which everyone is elevated in the way that the story is now retold. So I work a lot with African philosophy and theology, spirituality, and to express those concepts within my art. And is the concept of animism, meaning that all life and everything on this planet has energy and it has connectiveness. And I try to weave that sense of connectiveness throughout my art. I want my art to be a visual story that people can ask questions, and as a story unfolds, they can again see themselves within that context. Where am I in this center of energy of relating to the world and to other people and other things?
That's interesting. I want to rewind to what you were saying about cowboys and Indians, because one, I think it's important for us to understand the importance of the narrative, and when you know history and you juxtapose real history against that narrative and you tell the truth about it, it puts things in a completely different light. So
yes.
The term cowboy was something that really related to the brothers who were involved in cattle ranching. So the cattlemen were the Europeans. The cowboys were us. They learned what they learned from us. That's what I am told. And when you look at one of the baddest cowboys, and I say baddest within a current cultural paradigm, when you look at one of the baddest cowboys to ever exist, it was a brother by the name of Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves is the person that the character, the Lone Ranger, was derived from. he did different things in terms of how he corralled folks and brought them to justice, dead or alive, whatever he had to do to bring those folks in. He disguised himself. He did a lot of different things, but these are the missing things that we don't know about those stories. So when we do know those truths, then it empowers us and it gives us a greater sense of identity because of our awareness.
Correct.
Yeah, and it also speaks to the need for us to tell our stories, because when we let others tell our stories, they don't get the full truth about who we are, what we do, and what we're capable of. So I just had to mention that. Baz Reeves is one of my heroes. Yeah. So, but you are a storyteller. So, and I would imagine that you are connected with the Cleveland Association of Black Storytellers.
At one time, yes.
Okay. So talk about some of the things that you did as a result of your connection with that organization.
Well, the beauty of that time that I was involved was, one, there was lots of funding out there available to support the role of the storyteller in the community. And, the griot shouldn't be paid, but at that time, that particular role in the professional sense, there was a lot of funding from the libraries, from the schools, from the other foundations here in Cleveland and actually around the world to support that role of the oral historian. And eventually that money started drying out. Why? I'm not exactly sure, but the role is still very much needed. And I can remember during that particular time, this was maybe about more than 10 years ago, being in a lot of schools and in an auditorium, and I'm telling a story and I'm looking at these children who are captivated for just a glimmer of hope, just a glimmer of identity where they could see themselves within the context of a story that had hope, that had value, that had morality, that had lessons. And I'm looking at these kids, a lot of them with stained uniforms, hair maybe a little unkept, and I would cry because, these are children who probably didn't sleep all night because their parents were having issues in the home, or they didn't have breakfast that morning, or they were having other, relationship issues with other kids in school, or they were being bullied. And, and there was this sense, there was a hunger. And the role of the oral historian to not only relay snippets and weave in history, but it was to say you are alive and you have meaning, and I'm sharing with you a story that has meaning, that you can take that information and you can work it, you can make it part of who you are, and that's kind of the way that the oral historian has always been, to gather the community together, to remind them of greatness, to remind them of stories and morals and lessons of how we are to relate to each other, to impart those social mores. And so, we're missing that. We're missing those conversations, because storytelling really is about conversation. It's not about performance art per se.
Yes. And also, as you're describing the scenario, I see that it's an opportunity to engage an active imagination.
Yes.
When you look at the power of visualization and you look at the power of using one's imagination, I've just used the word power. It is something that can empower people and enable them to create what it is that is important to them. That's where that personal responsibility that we talked about earlier in our conversation comes from. your awareness of creating a reality for yourself and knowing that you have an ability to create that awareness and that to create that reality.
Correct. And in a lot of ways, I would consider the storyteller as a motivational speaker because, we tell and we make people laugh, but, just like a magician, will make you feel like, swallowing a sword is a good thing. It hurts, but it makes you laugh. It provides context in that, you're understanding how the truth needs to be dealt with in a very real way, but also in a very imaginative way.
Yes. So you close the chapter on storytelling, or are you continuing to do it?
Occasionally, I find myself doing it in some of my private women's groups. I still look for opportunities to tell stories wherever I am because that's who I am. It's not, I don't turn on and say, okay, I'm Joyce, the storyteller. I'm telling stories every day, and I'm telling stories through my life. And I think that's where it becomes more effective. I'm not on stage. I'm living the stories that I tell.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we want to talk about the other side of your artistic talent. It has taken you quite a few places, not just Cleveland, but you've been able to show your work on a national basis. You are one of those artists in Cleveland who have been able to go beyond the boundaries of the city limits and experience a certain level of success. So we're going to talk a bit more about that other artistic lane that you're traveling in right after we take this break. You're listening to Open Door Cleveland. I'm Vince Robinson, and I'm talking to Joyce Morrow Jones. She's an artist in Cleveland, but her work is all around the world. We'll be right back with more Open Door Cleveland right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burton Bell Carr community radio station.
Hi, this is Glenda Dames Fincher from Kincaid's Kindred Spirits Sickle Cell Support and Youth Mentoring Group. Here's a quick word about the importance of blood donation in the African American community. African American patients with sickle cell disease are less likely to have physical reactions to blood donated by other African Americans. African American donors are almost 3 times more likely to match the blood needed for sickle cell patients than our non-African American donors. It's extremely important to increase the number of available blood donors from all ethnic groups. To schedule your life-saving donation today, go to redcrossblood.org or call 800-RED-CROSS. Thank you, WOVU 95.9 FM, for helping support sickle cell awareness.
We're back with artist Joyce Morrow Jones on Open Door Cleveland with Vince Robinson, and we are talking about art right now. I know that you have been doing exhibitions and you have been creating these. I think you used the term craft earlier in our conversation. Talk about this other artistic endeavor that you have been consuming yourself with lately.
As I mentioned before, my work is primarily centered on African philosophy and theology, and part of that is my series on masquerades, which is a misnomer in itself, because the mask represents the mysteries of the ancestors. And in some cultures, it represents nature and the spirit of nature and its connection to human beings. But primarily, I work with African masquerades, and I was have had a wonderful opportunity to showcase my exhibition called Spirit of the Masquerade, which is, I guess, more than 100 pieces, large scale and small, replicas and recreations of what a masquerade would look like if you were in that indigenous area. What is fascinating is that every single culture across the world has found some way of expressing the human connection to the other world and or to the other realms. And so the connection that someone from Germany or Australia would have, looking at how the masquerades are utilized in Africa, there's a light bulb sometimes that comes on, and they recall how what they express in their culture is very similar. But the what I like is that the majority of the masquerades that I show within this exhibition are Egungun, and Egungun is represents the ancestral realm, and that's important because as we look at how we uplift and elevate our history and our family and the importance of family and the continuity of legacy and generation, all that is expressed within the context of celebrating Egungun.
Okay, interesting. What form does your work take? I don't want to. I don't know what the right word is. I'm searching for the words, but I don't want to minimize it. Some could call it dolls, but you wouldn't call it a doll. What would you call it?
Well, actually, there's been a lot of conversation about whether I call them dolls or small sculpture, or there's a whole element of that three-dimensional structure that, for lack of better interpretation, in an indigenous community, they would be called dolls. In the professional art arena, they would be called 3D sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter to me if they're called dolls or structure or sculptures or figurines. What's important is that does it have that energy within its structure to communicate the story, to communicate the idea, not just in its artistic representation, but in the essence of what it's intended for. I first saw masquerades in videos and in pictures, and I didn't understand what it was until, with all this technology now, we can see videos from all over the world, and to see a masquerade in performance, and even then, I still didn't really understand what it was all about. So the opportunity that I have when I exhibit Spirit of the Masquerade is to talk about, what is the importance of ancestors, what is the importance of connecting to the energy of Mother Earth through masquerades. Why is it important in terms of community? Because we don't see that. We don't have that sense of reverence. I mean, here in the United States. So for them, it's to give an appreciation of another culture in a way that helps them to say, gee, and maybe even ask the questions, why aren't we doing this here? For example, in Charlotte, in Charleston, after the Mother Emanuel shootings, part of the memorial were the masquerades from Oyotunin village they came and they danced in that space, which was a very, very important because it was representing the spirit of the ancestors to be in, to come and to do healing in that space. Well, that would have been something that probably would not have happened if Oyotunyu wasn't here in the United States representing that part of Yoruba culture. So we've disconnected so much that we think that these things are very archaic or they're not needed anymore. But there's a part of who we are in the diaspora that still needs those elements of our African traditions and culture.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about how you connect Africans in the diaspora with an aspect of their culture that goes largely unnoticed. When you use a term like Yoruba, there are so many of us who have no idea what that means. When you talk about these deities, again, because we've been disconnected or distanced from that, when we hear those things, many of our brothers and sisters who, fully embrace Christianity are going to instantly shut down because it's seen as evil. Could you talk about, what some of those concepts are and make them real for folks who don't fully understand or know about them?
Yes. I think when we talk about the whole aspect of animism and that everything has life, everything has energy, it's all about how we give respect and we honor them. So, many people say, oh, I go to the water and I just feel so relaxed. I feel, energized. And so the water has energy. I mean, that's science. That's, that's religion. That's something that we accept, but we don't think to give honor to it. And a lot of that has to, and we see that because we dishonor water. We, put trash in the water. We leave trash at our beaches. We want to take from it, but then we don't want to give back, to that. So when, for example, for the Yoruba, water is revered and it has lots of names and actually that would be in any culture, any indigenous culture, water will have different names. It will have a different attachment. And that was a human way of being able to say, we cannot live without you. Therefore, we're establishing some way of connecting with water so that we give reverence to what we need. And that's kind of how that works. I mean, this is water has no enemy because water is life support and life giving. So for the Yoruba, there are, for lack of a better word, deities, but actually they're forces of nature that have names, and they relate to that energy of water through that the attributes, related to those metaphysical forces, and so it's a natural thing. It's not. Our interpretation here in the, in the Western world, or as it was interpreted by explorers who came to Africa, they related back to their people and they wrote books on things that they understood based on their experiences. And it wasn't necessarily the story from the context of the people. So there's so many misnomers out there that how do we begin to rewrite and correct language and interpretation and definitions of what an indigenous culture actually felt about those things? Mm-hmm. It is very hard. Yeah. It's difficult. And I mean, for example, the whole word use of the word masquerade. An explorer would, visit a tribe. He didn't know the language, and he saw what he called the witch doctor, which was the healer, go into his hut and come out in this costume. Well, from his cultural standpoint, they call that a masquerade because that's what they did in his culture. They put on a mask and they paraded around. So that term stuck, but that's not the most appropriate word. But that's still what we use. And now to correct that by using other words, there are some scholars who have now used the word spectacle, because when a masquerade appears in the community, everything stops, it becomes the center of attention. So words have a lot of power. So, if we want to get stuck on theology and practice, if we go back to any community, any culture, any tradition, there has always been reverence for nature and ancestors and how they relate to us, even in this physical world now.
That was an amazing response, Joyce. And as you were giving that explanation, I was just thinking about basically what we're talking about is having a greater understanding of our relationship with nature. That's kind of what it represents. And we've been separated from that reverence for nature because of our lack of understanding of the symbols and the names and basically just the overall cultural paradigm that you just explained.
Yes.
Yes. I want to do something kind of unusual right now because you used the term masquerade, and we've been talking about masks. And I wrote a poem. It's called Unmasked. So I'm going to read this poem, and then after I finish the poem, we will come back and conclude the show with the final quarter. I am the fulfillment of a mother's purpose. I am light from darkness. I am the sun. I am not a mask of shame or guilt for oppressing the expression of melanin in human form, for ignorance of dignity and value on the planet. Nor am I a mask for the sins of generational exploitation and manipulation, inflicting systemic pain and sorrow on undeserving, century after century, until today. Until the now, which bears clearer witness to the truth once hidden behind the mask. Behind the mask is fear. Fear that the grip of control will loosen, leaving a vacuum of powerlessness to consume what once dominated all. Fear that secrets will be told, revealing insecurities that fueled a lust for power unfounded in moral fortitude. Fear that a genotype will be wiped clean from existence, formerly mentioned in affirmative sentences, now in past tenses. Glimpses of heroes, worshipped under steeples and statues, rapidly disappearing, toppling and trending as a global population begins mending from the dysfunction of destruction by gluttons. A population reeling from flagrant brutality on display with impunity for the world to see, courtesy of an iPhone, cell phone, camera, I spy. Injustice in democracy, in the land of the free and the home of enslaved. Looking at the mask, now feeling brave, knowing the mask is in its last day, looking forward to the day when it is no longer needed, breathing freely, unmasked.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
Thank you. Vince Robinson with Joyce Morrow Jones. We are rounding third and heading home on Open Door Cleveland. We'll be right back right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burt Bell Carr community radio station.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is DJ Fatty Banks.
Dr. Benea K. Jones.
Alicia Graves.
Jordan Lucius.
This is Miss V on your radio, and you're listening to the best community radio station in the land. WOVU, Our Voices United, 959 FM.
WOVU 95.9 FM. Find us on Facebook. Like our page. Leave us a comment. We are WOVU 95.9, streaming live on WOVU.org.
We're talking with artist Joyce Morrow Jones. Before we took the break, I did a poem that I've been sitting on for a while. She described the masquerade, a series of art or something that she has created, and I just couldn't resist the opportunity to connect not only as a visual artist but as a storyteller in my own right. What were your thoughts about the poem, Joyce?
Well, it took me back to the joy and passion that I had when my boys were in high school, and during Black History Month, they had an assignment to explore someone African American in literature, and how proud I felt for them to research Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and so many other poets, and how their experience in the spoken and written word was able to capture something so poignant and to convey something that was an expression of spirit and soul. So that's it. So you took me back to that, and I was just thinking, how many homes have books on the spoken word of our people to visually communicate thought and to express ideas and to express heart? You know, the things that we don't always talk about, the things that we feel, the things that we can't explain. I mean, I was touched. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just let you know that I was thinking about Langston Hughes when I wrote that piece, because he had the piece "We Wear the Mask." And so it was really an impetus for the creation of that. But, it also related to what we're dealing with now, and I was just thinking about the mask as a metaphor, because,
yes,
that's really where this whole thought was precipitated from. I want to talk a bit more about your art, because you've talked about, certain concepts that are weaved in or woven into your craft. And I'm just wondering how you use color, how you use texture and fabric to convey symbols and understanding and the nuances of culture.
True to my craft nature, and that's how I started. I would say more than 85% of what I work with are recycled materials. And that in itself creates the foundation, the context for what I do, because it is recreating from something that already existed. So for me, working with African cultural traditions, expressing them through my art, I see it as a foundation. And I was sharing with another artist yesterday that when I see things that are broken, I consider them a remnant. And the remnant for me is our ancestors. So as I'm building upon those remnants and I'm reconstructing them to represent something that's new, something that's different, or actually something that's part of or semi-part of something that we could recognize. A lot of times people, once I finish a product, they wouldn't even know that most of what I use were recycled materials. They're like, oh my gosh, really? You created it from that? But the outer representation is not as important as what is in the inside, the constructs. And again, it's kind of pulling everything together, that we cannot see who we are in our current form without looking at everything else behind us or everything else that's part of us. So for me, I, 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 think that is it's just so essential. And so when I explain to people all those things that I weave together in my art, they can begin to see. And as I tell them how it relates to me in the larger context of world theology or world philosophy, it begins to make sense to them how all that becomes pulled together. And essentially, it's kind of like how our reverence for quilt making and how a quilter will take pieces from, grandma's dress and auntie's dress and so-and-so's dungarees. I mean, that's the way we used to do it. And we put all those pieces together and it began to tell a story of, all those people who contributed to part of something that became a larger piece.
Mm-hmm. When you mention quilting, I'm reminded of the fact that quilts used to be used as a way to communicate with each other and conceal our messages from massa who might be aware or not of our level of sophistication with respect to those matters. Is there any kind of I don't want to call it a clandestine because that wouldn't be a good word, but is there any kind of a way that you can share those intimate messages or those vital messages with folks through your art?
Well, I think when I first started creating dolls or 3D sculptures of the Orisha, which are part of the Yoruba pantheon, and I was kind of showing them at street, vendor fairs or whatever, people would look at them and they would say, I don't know what I'm looking at. And so I would start telling them stories, the stories that I had learned about them. And, they would be drawn in and they would say, oh, well, tell me a story about this one. So I think, we artists have an opportunity to not just create something that's abstract, but to create visual literacy so that if a person would see something similar again, they will begin to remember, oh, I remember when someone told me a story about Obatala, and then they would tell the story again. And this is how we, in our own informal way, perpetuate the oral history by telling the stories. And then that story is then told to someone else, and that story is told to someone else. And even if they don't get it right, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's providing the context so that people are not, so that they're open to learning, they're open to receiving new information, and then providing context for it.
I'm just imagining a book or a film or a video or something that would give you an opportunity to give us the image and give us the story and the education that goes along with it.
Someone else the same week encouraged me to do the same thing. I was at the Artist Archives of Western Reserve, and they have just launched a new exhibition called The Art and Thread. And if people need to go and see this, I was just totally amazed at how Tony Williams, he's a local artist, he curated this exhibition. And there's this one piece that he called Phenomenal Women, but I recognized that in the imagery that he used, they were representation of the Yoruba Orisha, Oya, Oshun, and Yemaya. And he didn't say that, but I could recognize it. And so I was telling one of the staff people the stories and looking at all the symbolism. I was sharing with her, here, and this is, and she was just so engaged. So now she has a story to tell when, patrons come in and they say, oh, well, I wonder, what this piece means. She can say, oh, well, da-da-da-da-da. We all contribute to the story. It's not just one person's story. It's our story. And as we tell our story, then that story becomes wider known. And that's the beauty of art.
Yes.
That's the beauty of culture and history.
Mm-hmm. You've been very privileged to have shown your work in and around Cleveland and other parts of the country. Can you talk about some of the things that you've been able to accomplish as an artist?
Oh, wow. Well, the numerous times that I have been in Charleston, which I strongly believe is a cultural mecca for receptivity of the Gullah art, the African art. I was able to connect with lots of people from all over the world. And because it is a tourist venue, and whenever I exhibit, I usually try to be on site for at least a week of the exhibition, to be there present, to talk to people about what they're seeing. And so the impact for me has been the dialogue, and, being able to have those conversations and to engage. And a lot of galleries don't really, well, first of all, a lot of artists can't afford to be there for a whole week, to be there present as an auxiliary staff to talk and engage. But, I try to immerse myself in every exhibition, to be there as much as possible. So for me, I think a lot of it is engagement, which leads to other community opportunities. So I was able to go into the schools and to do some storytelling, which was really, really cool, and did that in collaboration with some other musicians in the area, some other drummers, and to participate in other school art, performance art, to sit down and talk with the students, and to have them perform for me, what they have done, and to have those type of interactions. There was one organization that works with Indigo, and they have community days, and they invited me to come and to do some of my my corn husk dowels, and to show how they can use corn husk as a fiber to make dowel making. And this is something, that I was able to say that that came from the Native Americans, and how they would utilize dowel making as a way, based on things that were in their that were available during their harvest time. And and a lot of times people didn't know that. So everything is about bringing people and ideas and history together. And so for me, that's kind of what makes it great for me when I'm out away from Cleveland, to see how artists can engage in other opportunities that involve community and gallery exhibition, and to create a wider context for what we do.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you about what you shared earlier in the program in coming into your artistic excellence later down the line. And as I am involved in artistic pursuits here in Cleveland, I've seen this this kind of like a separation between the folks who are the MFAs and did it, as an academic thing, coming up and getting, credentialed and all of that. And then those of us who are artists because it's in us, Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about that, so we're going to have to pick that up at another time. But I commend you for your success in the art world, and I encourage you to continue to create, to continue to tell your stories, and to continue to fabricate the things that you do that bring about awareness of our culture and our ancestry, because it is something that is completely underemphasized and cannot be emphasized enough. Joyce Morrow Jones, thanks for joining us on Open Door Cleveland.
Thanks for having me, Vince. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And thank you for listening to Open Door Cleveland right here on 95.9 FM WOVU. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make it a great day, Cleveland. Peace.